discovered attack. The discovered attack is a move involving two distinct and simultaneous thrusts at enemy units. As one piece moves, checking or capturing or threatening, it unmasks the action of another piece against the opponent. The destructive force of this attack is enormous. It is as though you were moving two pieces at the same time. Let's now go through these examples that demonstrate the idea of a discovered attack. In the first example, it's white to move, and we see a very typical discovered attack motif. This motif comes about whenever you have the queens opposing each other along a certain line, and between them is a piece that can move away with check. In this case, it's our light squared bishop, which can move to f7 with check. This check forces the opposing side to take time to deal with the check, in this case by taking the bishop. But in the meantime, we've uncovered the attack of our queen against the opposing queen, and that is what's referred to as a discovered attack. By moving the bishop away, we created a discovered attack against the queen. Let's continue moving through this chapter so we can see how the discovered attack looks in its various forms and practice how we can bring discovered attacks about. In this example, it is again white to move. This time, rather than having two queens opposing each other with a bishop or some other piece between them, we have our rooks opposing the black rook with a bishop that can move away in between. This works because once we take the pawn on f7 with check, it really doesn't matter how black recaptures, whether black recaptures with the bishop, the queen, or the king, or even the rook. In any case, once they capture our bishop, we are going to capture and win that rook. And on some, we will have won a pawn and a rook for the price of just a bishop. So once again, this is the power of the discovered attack. We can take a pawn, seemingly a sacrifice, but it's not, because once the supposed sacrifice is accepted, the discovered attack sweeps in and we end up winning material. In this example, it's black to move, and we're going to see the first example of how to bring about a discovered attack by using violent moves, Chernev and Seinfeld's favorite kind of move, in order to accurately calculate tactics. Can you see any ways that we can violently force white into a very vulnerable position where we can then use a double attack to win even more material? Looking closely at the position yields the idea of playing bishop d3, taking a pawn, and by force creating a situation where white has to recapture our bishop on d3. The reason white has to do that is because our bishop is attacking not only the queen, but also the rook. This is a very, very dangerous bishop. It's already captured a pawn, and so white really has to recapture. Now you might recognize, albeit in a modified form, the idea of a queen of the opponent and a rook of our own aligned with each other with an interposing piece that can actually move away with check. And the way we do that in this occasion is, of course, bishop h2 check. Again, perhaps seemingly a sacrifice, but once the knight recaptures the bishop, we have discovered an attack of our rook against the white queen, and we end up winning lots of material. Let's move to the next example. In this example, it is black to move, And we're going to see now the similar sort of idea applied yet again. Can you see a violent move that will lead to a discovered attack? The move is actually knight takes bishop. Once again, a very violent move, capturing a full piece. If white recaptures our knight, which is in fact their best move, we now have this familiar standoff between our rook and an opposing queen with an interposing bishop that can move away with check, such that once the opposing team deals with the check, we can then capture that queen. This is the discovered attack. Here we have another position. In this occasion, we want to do essentially the same thing. We want to bring about a situation where our queens are opposing with an interposing bishop that can move away with check in such a way that it leaves the opposing team's queen undefended. How do we do that? Hopefully you're now beginning to see the pattern. We can play the violent move knight c7, taking a pawn and attacking the rook on a8. Black is virtually forced to capture that knight, but in so doing walks into the very situation we desire. Our queens opposed, with a bishop interposing between them, and that bishop can move away to e6 with check, forcing black to deal with the check, and then leaving us free to wander down the c-file and gobble up the opponent's queen. In this example, it is white to move. How can we bring about the situation we desire, where the opponent's queen opposes one of our very dangerous pieces, and then we can move away one of the interposing pieces with a gain of time, for example, a check, in order to use that time to then take the opponent's piece. The idea here is bishop takes knight. That's a violent move, and if black wants to recapture our bishop, they walk straight into this familiar setting with our rook opposed to their queen and an interposing bishop that can move away with check. Once the check's dealt with, we can capture that queen, and we've won a lot of material. This is a very interesting scenario. Here, as white, we already have the scenario that we're quite familiar with. We have a rook opposing our opponent's queen, and we have an interposing bishop. The only difficulty is that the bishop actually cannot move away with check because it's a dark squared bishop, but our opponent's king is on a light square. We note that our bishop can move away, for example, to h6, and it comes with a threat of taking the rook. Here we're threatening to both take the rook on one hand and also to take the queen on the other hand. As it happens, if the black queen takes our rook, we will have a checkmate brewing after about 8 other moves. However, black is not obligated to take our rook and go through this forced checkmate line. Instead, playing in this way would actually give black an option. Note that at the start of this book, Chernev and Seinfeld state that we're not about giving our opponents options. We are about imposing our will on our opponents. And it's only by using forceful and violent moves that we can cut down the choices that our opponents have. By playing this bishop move, it's not violent enough. It gives black the opportunity to play queen takes a3, which in the first place wins a pawn, and in the second place guards this rook, and in the third place steps away from the discovered attack that we had created. So it's very important to make sure that your discovered attacks are sufficiently violent. In fact, that all of your attacks are sufficiently violent and that they actually work and there are no covert defenses. So in this case, the correct mechanism is not to move the bishop away until you can move it away with check. How do we do that? We start with queen takes rook check. We've won a rook, that's very violent. Now the king is essentially forced to capture our queen. Now we can move our bishop away to h6, this time with check, forcing the king to move. And now we can pick up the queen. We've left no room for our opponent to make any of their own choices. We are imposing our own will, and we've ended up winning a lot of material. In this example, it is again white to move. Can you see any ways that we can use violent moves to bring about the situation for a discovered attack? In this case, it revolves around the tension on the d4 pawn. We can, in fact, take the pawn, and though it seems we only have 2 pieces defending this pawn, and black has 3 pieces attacking it, we have a secret up our sleeve, as we'll see. Black takes the pawn, we take back, black takes back, and we take back. Now black commits a big error by taking back again, and the error should be evident. Our queens are opposed, and the interposing bishop is able to move away with check. Once the check's dealt with, that queen is all ours. In this example, it is black to move, and there are a couple of ways to violently force the position that we desire. The first way is the way that Chernev and Seinfeld give in their book, and that is knight f3 check. This is a very violent move. It checks the king. It's also a knight fork against the rook. This move essentially forces white to capture our knight. Now, how do we proceed? We play queen g6 check, and you'll note that in playing this move, we have aligned our queen with white's undefended queen, and we have an interposing piece. This piece cannot yet move away with a check. However, we've just provided a check to the white king, and that king must move. Now that it has moved, our knight is able to move away with check. We just have to be careful of which square we choose to use, because if we use the f2 square for check, then the queen we're trying to attack can actually slide across and deal with the check by saving itself. Therefore, we play knight g3 check. Now white has to deal with the check in a way that does not involve its queen, leaving its queen there for us to then take. And in that, we've won a lot of material. Now, the other line that Stockfish gives is very similar, except it starts with rook takes rook, also an extremely violent move that requires white to recapture our rook. Once that move is played, then Stockfish goes for this knight f3 idea, which is still a knight fork. We're going to be winning this pawn, if nothing else. And if white takes our knight, then the same idea applies with queen g6 check, forcing the king into a position where we can create a discovered attack against the white queen. In this example, we saw basically our familiar pattern of the queen opposed with our pieces and an interposing piece. This time, however, the interposing piece was a knight rather than a bishop. In this example, we're going to use some violent moves and end up similarly with an interposing piece that can jump away with check in order to provide us the discovered attack that we desire. To do that, we start with rook takes knight. after black recaptures our rook, we again play a rook takes knight. And this is very violent and essentially forces queen to recapture the rook. Now we have a scenario where our bishop and black's queen are opposing each other. And there's an interposing knight, which can jump away with check. Once again, we don't jump to e7 because then the black queen can move in order to deal with the check. We have to jump to h6. This way, black either moves the king or takes the knight, leaving the queen on pre. In this example, it's black to move. And here we have to use a combination of the weapons that we've learned thus far in this book in order to justify the discovered attack that we see. And the discovered attack we see is that our black queen is opposed to the white queen. There's an interposing piece here, our knight. It cannot jump away with a check, but it can jump away with a capture. And the capture would be of this pawn here on e4. Now, our queen is defended by both the bishop and the pawn. So if we jump away, we're not afraid of queen takes queen. We're particularly not afraid of queen takes queen because not only can we just recapture, but we can also insert knight takes rook check. And once the king moves, then we can regather the queen. And at the end of all of that, you'll also note that if the queen has moved away, this knight will be undefended and still attacked by our rook. Let's see how this looks. The knight moves away. Our threat right now is to take the queen. So if white simply takes our knight, which by the way has already won a pawn and is threatening the rook, if he takes that knight, then we can take the queen, free of charge. If instead he takes our queen, our knight does move away again, taking the rook with check. Once the check is dealt with, we regather our queen. And once our knight is captured, we're able to capture this other knight. And on sum, we've won a lot of material. We have a full extra rook in this position. Let's see that all again. We have this typical position. We move the interposing piece away, creating a discovered attack. This time we moved away not with a check, but with a capture and also with a threat to capture again with check. So once again, a very violent move from the interposing piece and an intermediate move here to check. And the discovery has paid off. In this example, it's black to move. And currently, black is down in terms of material. Both sides have 2 rooks. Both sides have 1 minor piece. Black has a second minor piece, but white has a queen. So white is up in terms of material, but it's black's turn to move. And that material advantage is not going to last. The way we're going to see this is the same as always. We notice that we have this long-range piece, a bishop, and it is, although from a long range, it is in contact with the opposing side's queen. And there is an interposing piece that can move away. It's not going to move away with check, because if it did that, well, then we would have rook takes rook, bishop takes queen, king takes bishop, and in the resulting endgame, both sides would have a rook and a minor piece each. It would be relatively equal. Instead, we find a more violent way to go forward. We're going to move away not with the check, but instead with the capture of the knight. Now we've already captured a knight. This queen is essentially doomed anyway. The best it can ever do is take this bishop. Now, if rook takes rook, how can we respond there? If rook takes rook, then our rook can come up here with a check, which would in fact be a checkmate, this queen being unable to come back and defend due to the pin. So therefore, white takes the opportunity to kamikaze sacrifice the queen for the bishop. But rather than immediately recapturing that queen, we can use this rook to capture the other rook with check. And once we've gained the time here by having the king move, we then regather the queen. And look at this position. Now we both have a rook, but as black, we also have a second rook and we have a bishop. So we have so much more material than if we had gone down this particular discovery of rook f1 check. So we played in a very violent way. We calculated various options and we realized that taking the knight is best because there's nothing really white can do. Can't take our rook favorably, can't take our bishop favorably, ultimately takes our bishop because there's just nothing favorable to do, but that allows us to take a rook and then queen, and then this position is utterly winning for black. This position, it's white to move, and there's a slight variation on the theme. This time, we note that we've got a rook aligned with our opponent's queen, and there are two interposing pieces. Now, one way you could play this is by moving this bishop away with force, say, for example, capturing the knight on f6. And once black recaptures, you can move the other bishop away, again with force. It's a threat to capture the rook, and there's also a threat to capture the queen. Now, in a real game, you have to visualize these things. You have to visualize making those moves. So try for yourself to visualize bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop, bishop to c4, attacking the rook. And what is it about that position that's good and what's bad? Well, what's good is that you have essentially a discovered attack against the queen, and you're also attacking the rook. What's not so good about it is black has the opportunity to use this rook, which is attacked, to take on b2. And the reason he can take on b2 is because he'll have a bishop here supporting that square. Then, all of a sudden, even though you're attacking his queen, he's attacking your queen. And it turns out that position is still very good for white. Still very good for white indeed. White can take the queen, and black is actually unable to capture this queen, because if they do capture this queen, we'll take this rook, which is undefended. Remember, this bishop is actually here. And if we take that rook, it's actually checkmate. So in that position, it's still good for white, but it's a little bit complicated because of the fact that we've moved this bishop first, which has moved this bishop here, which has then given black the opportunity to take this pawn in response to our bishop c4 move. What you then do is consider changing the move order. What if we start with bishop c4? And once again, let's imagine this move first. If we play this bishop c4, we hit the rook. The rook cannot play to take the pawn here because it's completely unsupported. We would simply swoop in with our own bishop, and that would uncover the attack on the queen. That would be a disaster for black. So after bishop c4, this rook's going to have to move, maybe back to a5, maybe back to a8. Then we'll be able to move this bishop away, violently capturing the knight and uncovering the attack on the queen. And that's just going to be a lot more simple. Even though both ways of doing it were good, this way is the more simple way. The rook moves away, we take the knight, and then we're free to take the queen. Once again, just to show that other example, if we had taken the knight first, this bishop now combines with the rook, so that after we move here to attack the rook can take this pawn. Now we take queen, and the saving grace is that this cannot occur. This cannot occur because of checkmate will still occur. But why go down a more complicated line when you can go down a much more simple and violent forcing line instead? In this example, again, it is black to move, and we want to find a move that moves an interposing piece away with force and uncovers an attack in the meantime. The way to do that here is by noticing that our queen is aligned with the knight and the bishop, and that if we move the interposing bishop away with force, we will be also attacking the knight. So we start with bishop h3. Since there's no check available, let's attack the rook. Wouldn't make much sense to try and attack the queen because the queen can capture, or the pawn can capture as well. So we attack the rook, and in defending the rook, we've made a situation where we're now attacking two pieces, the bishop and the knight. So we can take the bishop, we're attacking the rook again. White takes our bishop, the knight remains unguarded. Now Stockfish has a more complicated way to defend. After bishop h3, Stockfish suggests that white should give up the exchange by playing e3. But it's not necessarily giving up the exchange. Well, it is. It is, because now we take the rook and white takes our knight, and then we save our bishop. The game goes on from here. It's still complicated, but black is certainly better. Regardless of the continuation, the best move is in fact this discovery, a forceful move against the rook that also uncovers an attack against the knight. In this position, it is black to move, and we're going to see a slightly different variation of the discovered attack. This time, we don't necessarily have the two opposing pieces we're used to seeing, which is one of our pieces and the opponent's queen, for example. This time, what we need to see is that after imagining a violent move like knight takes knight, queen takes knight, we can make a move that will attack the queen and will also uncover an attack against a different undefended piece in the white camp. That piece is the white dark squared bishop. Our dark squared bishop is opposed to the white team's dark squared bishop, and there is a pawn that's an interposing pawn. If that pawn moves away violently, then we'll be able to take that bishop. And that is why this whole example works. We get to take the knight, and once the queen comes back, that queen is in a position where it can be attacked by this interposing pawn. The interposing pawn steps forward, attacking the queen. Now that's a violent move that white has to respond to. They can't allow us to capture the queen, so the queen moves. But once the queen moves, we're free to capture that undefended bishop that we discovered an attack on. In this position, it is white to move again. And we want to use violent moves to bring about discovered attacks. This is a very typical pattern that by now we're fairly used to. We see our rook opposed to the black queen, and there's an interposing knight. But there's no way to jump the knight away with check, or with a capture, or even really with a threat of a capture. At least not yet. But we can use the violent move knight takes knight to kick off the party. This essentially forces rook to recapture. And now we can combine the idea of a knight fork with the idea of a discovered attack. We move our knight away to b5. On b5, it forks both the queen and the rook. At the same time, we've uncovered an attack against the rook from our rook. So now the queen moves away, and we double back with our knight to capture the rook, thereby winning the exchange. Let's look at that again. We can take the knight to force the rook into a vulnerable position. Now our knight, which is an interposing piece, can actually jump away with force. The force of a fork against a queen and a rook. Once the queen moves, we can win the exchange. Of course, had black taken the knight, we win the queen. In this example, it's black to move. And again, we want to be able to move this interposing piece away with force because we have a rook opposing the queen on the other side. How can we do that? We combine various ideas, starting with the pin. We see that this pawn here is pinned. So if we were to take this bishop, check, the only recapture available is with this pawn, which opens up the diagonal for this bishop. That bishop would then be able to move away all the way up to g1. g1 looks like a silly square because the king can take it, the rook can take it, but don't forget, when we move this bishop away, we're doing it with an attack against the queen. This is the discovered attack. It's like moving two pieces at once. Not only are we going to be attacking the queen, but with a bishop up here on g1, in combination with our queen here on h6, we're going to be threatening checkmate. And white is going to have to deal with the checkmate threat or otherwise give up their queen. So let's see this now. We take the bishop. This pawn is pinned. It can't take. It's illegal. So the only capture available is with the other pawn. Now we can move this interposing piece away, not with check, but with a threat of checkmate. At the same time, we're threatening the queen. White plays the clever move, bishop c4. This interposes a piece in front of the queen so that we can't capture the queen anymore. It also removes the bishop from the second rank, thereby allowing the queen to defend along the second rank. Now, that's an ingenious defense that we overlooked in our initial evaluation of this position. Is there any way we can actually continue? In fact, there is. We can play rook takes c4. And the idea here is we are once again attacking the queen. Should the queen capture our rook, we will have checkmate on the board. In this position, it's white to move. And once again, we're going to bring about, through a violent move, the conditions for a discovered attack. In this case, it's a little bit more subtle in the sense that the violent move we're going to use is not a capture, rather it's a threat to capture. The threat that we're going to use is bishop e7, threatening to capture the rook. And we will capture that rook whether it stays still or whether it moves over to d8. The only quote-unquote safe square for that rook is going to be e8. But now we have this familiar pattern where we have our piece, long-range piece, opposing another piece on the board from the opponent's camp, and there's an interposing piece. This piece cannot move away with check, can't move away with capture, but it can certainly move away with a threat, a high-value threat against the queen. We are now threatening the queen, and we're threatening the rook. And in fact, that would be checkmate. So, black takes our rook, and here we take the queen with one material. In this position, it is white to move. You may notice here we've got a familiar pattern. Our bishop is opposed to the opposing team's queen, and there's an interposing rook, which in this case can move away with check. Once the check is dealt with, we can capture the queen, and we've won a lot of material. In this position, it is white to move. How can we bring about a discovered attack situation? Well, we can start with knight c6, attacking the queen. And if the queen moves to e8, then we have this scenario where our long-range piece, our rook, is opposed to that queen. There's an interposing piece, which can move away not with a check, but with a capture. And as a result, this piece can't really be captured without forfeiting the queen. After, for instance, the knight recaptures, we take the queen, and we've won a lot of material. Now, of course, that's not forced. When we attacked the queen could have come somewhere like c8 instead. But in that scenario, we can just win even more material for ourselves. So really, we just needed to consider in our calculations that even if the queen does come to e8, that we have this discovered attack at our disposal and that it works. In this example, it's black to move, and this should be quite simple for us now because we see immediately that our queen is opposed to the opposite queen. There's an interposing bishop, and that bishop can move away with check, forcing white to recapture and allowing us to stroll over and pick up a queen. In this example, it's black to move. And again, we should very quickly see now the idea of our piece, which is a long-range piece, opposed to a high-value target. And there's an interposing piece that can move away, not with a check, but with a capture, a violent move, capturing the knight. And if there is a recapture, that allows us to win the queen. That concludes this chapter on discovered attacks. Come back next time and we will look at the concept of a discovered check. As we proceed through these chapters, we are putting more and more weapons into our armamentarium, and all of these things we will be able to use both individually and in combination with one another when we play our own games of chess, and they will be the mechanisms by which we win chess.